Hello, hi. My name is Faisal, and this is a short video for SQL Server. For those of you who are new to SQL Server and who wants to configure SQL Server settings so that it can perform a bit better than it is normally, is if you configure these settings, I think your server should perform better. Um, I'm not an expert, but I'm working with SQL Server since some time, so I thought to make a small video. This is my very first video, by the way. So apologies if I do anything wrong in here. Okay. Now, the first thing first, when you configure SQL Server, we should look into. By default, SQL Server captures all the available memory in whatever the server has. Like this is a virtual machine in my home lab, so I don't have a lot of resources. However, I have given it 4 virtual processors and 16 GB of RAM. So by default, SQL Server captures all the memory in the RAM. So to set up memory, there are basically 4 things which we have to check. 4 parameters. There's a minimum memory, server settings, maximum server memory, index creation memory, and minimum memory per query. And the minimum server memory is, I believe, the most misunderstood concept. Basically, what we think that when we set up some value over here, it tells the server how much memory it should be using when it starts, but that's not right. Actually, this is not what it is for. Basically, when we set up a value in here, let's say I set up here 6 GB. So let's say there is an application which performs well on let's suppose I have 100 GB RAM in this server, and I have I have an application dynamic AX, let's say, which recommended RAM level is 16 GB. So if I set up a value of 16 GB in here, so when operating system starts claiming back the memory, the SQL server will stop giving the memory back to operating system when it hits the limit whatever we set here. So let's say the recommended RAM for dynamic AX is 16, where it performs okay or good. So if operating system claims back the memory from SQL Server, it will stop giving it back when it hits this limit, whatever we set in here. So the performance, our minimum requirement performance, will not be affected. So that's something which we should set up, and that's, it's always good to do. And now let's say in here, the maximum server memory. Now, the maximum server memory leaves some memory for your operating system. Like I have 16 GB, so what I am doing, I am leaving 4 GB for my server, for my operating system, and the rest I am giving to SQL Server. Now, the other settings, which are like index creation memory, it is 0 by default, and actually it is just fine because you don't want to bound SQL Server to use specific amount of memory for a very specific procedure, since you let the SQL Server decide how much memory it should be using to get job done as soon as possible. So I believe leave it at 0. Minimum memory per query. Minimum memory per query default setting works just fine. If you run a huge queries, you can maybe adjust it, but personally I would leave it the way it is. So I would not actually change it. Now the next thing, friends, an important thing is maximum degree of parallelism. The maximum degree of parallelism is by default, SQL Server uses all the available processors in SQL Server. Like if I go here, right, and if I show you my system information, I believe it should show here 4. Well, don't look at here. It's just okay. Four logical processors. So basically, by default, SQL Server is going to use all the logical processors. So what happens that the SQL Server will use all the processor during the query of during the execution of the query. Well, this is great for large queries, but it can cause sometimes performance problems and limit the concurrency. A better approach to cope this is to limit the parallelism to the number of physical cores on the single socket. Let's say you have a server with the 2 sockets and 4 processors or 4 processor cores per socket with the hyper-threading. So in this case, the best is to actually limit the parallelism to 1 socket. So in this case, the best value would be 4. Now there is an article from Microsoft. If you search the Microsoft recommendations for MDOP value, maximum degree of parallelism value, you will see an article from Microsoft where Microsoft says that the maximum value should be 8. It should not be more than 8. Well, I do not keep more than 4. Now that also there are also applications like Dynamic EX. The Microsoft recommends to keep a value of 1, only 1. So just go with Microsoft recommendations, but just try to keep it on a single socket of the server. Okay, now another thing, the cost of threshold parallelism. Now normally we leave it 5. That's by default. Now this is, to be honest, very low. Normally I increase it by 50. So that works just fine for me. Okay. Now the next thing is actually the tempdb. That is here, tempdb. Now if we look at the tempdb, in my situation, I have 4 cores and I have only 1 tempdb. General advice is that that it is possible to minimize. Basically, you increase the number of files to manage the contention in the database. The initial number of the data files for the tempdb should be calculated as the proportion of number of processors installed on SQL Server. SQL advisory team, Microsoft advisory team recommends the tempdb should be created with 1 file per physical processor core. So basically, I read in an article that you should have, if you have, let's say, 16 processors, 16 cores in a server you have given to SQL Server, so you should create 8 tempdb files and then check the contention. If the contention is high, then increase it by 4. But do not increase the files more than the number of processors. So you can simply add them here, just clicking add, and keep adding. Like I have temp dev 1, and I can actually create. I can create, but make sure that keep the initial size similar. The increment size, I mean, these are the things you can actually manage when you create that. Next thing I would want to mention is trace flags. Basically, there are 3 trace flags which I normally set up. One is trace flag 1117, 1118, and 4199. The trace flag 1117 actually changes the way autogrowth behaves. So all the files in a file group grow when the autogrowth is triggered. Like we have seen here, the tempdb files. Let's say there are 16 tempdb files in here. If you have created 16 tempdb files in here and I have given it an increment value of 100 MB, now if the database size is not same, then there is no use of tempdb actually. So what you should do actually, you should enable the trace flag 1117 so that all the files within a file group grow equally. So the file size will be kind of uniform. Same way, trace flag 1118, it eliminates the allocation of mixed extent on the instance of SQL Server, and instead it will do the uniform extent for any new object. There is another trace flag which is very effective, which is very nice, 4199. It activates multiple different query optimization adjustments and fixes all the possibly and generate a different query plan than the one you are getting without this trace flag. Good for the query optimization, which will help a lot in the execution. So to set up trace flag, the best way is go to the SQL Server Configuration Manager. I mean, first of all, if you go in here to query, if I run that right now, it will tell me I can turn on the I can turn on this trace flag. I can turn on the trace flag through the query window, but whenever you restart the SQL Server, that is just not going to work. So the best way, the trace flag settings will not be safe. The best way to do is, I'll show you in a second how to do that through query, but the best way to do is actually open the SQL Server Configuration Manager, go to this setting, select the SQL Server, go to the properties, go to the startup parameters. Here is it. That's the startup parameter. You go in here, :T1117: there should not be any space in here. Be very careful when you edit this, because these are the startup setting, and it can, if you do it wrong, it can mess up the system. So okay, so what's going on here? T111, oh sorry, 117. So basically, here we add this T1117: T-T1118: T4199. Click OK. Well, that will take effect when you restart the service. It is not going to take effect straight away. So basically, when I was doing that, you'll have to do this. So that will work fine. So if we trace status, all right, there you go. Your trace flags are set up. And there is another thing, log pages in memory. I really wanted to show you that, but I have to keep this video below 15 minutes. So well, I'll just finish it right now, and I'll try to make another video for that. And I hope you will enjoy that. And if you enjoy, and if you have any question, just leave a comment and I'll try to answer. And thank you. Cheers.